So let's talk about Trump v. U.S. 2024, the so-called Trump immunity case. So Trump doesn't get absolute immunity, but he does get some immunity when it comes to official acts. When it comes to official acts that's within his powers in the Constitution. When it comes to the power of the pardon, when it comes to the command of the military, the execution of laws, or control of the executive branch. The case extends from an ongoing federal trial to determine whether Donald Trump, president at the time, and others engaged in election interference during the 2020 election, including events during the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. It's the first time a case concerning criminal prosecution for alleged official acts of a president was brought before the Supreme Court. So 2024, Trump v. U.S. This is a landmark decision. This is going to be a decision that they're going to use as precedent. You had Clinton v. Jones. You had Nixon case, U.S. v. Nixon, 1974. Even U.S. Grant was arrested for speeding in a horse and carriage. He had to pay $20, and I heard that they impounded his carriage. In this country, we got the rule of law, so everybody has to follow the law. I thought that's what the rule of law was. Now, there is some fear. This sets a bad example. It sets a bad example. It kind of sets the blueprint for where the president has absolute immunity. So when it comes to the pardon, they were sitting there saying that, let's say somebody gives you $1 million to pardon the person. So he could pardon the person, but the bribery was the crime. So they said they would have to split it up. They would have to slice it. The pardon would be okay. So if right now Biden just wants to go ahead and start pardoning people, you got Joseph Couch, right? Joseph Couch opened fire on I-75. If Biden was to pardon him because somebody gave him $1 million, the pardon would stand, but the bribery, he would have presumptive immunity, but that may be a crime. It may be a crime. We still don't know that. So when it comes, he's the executive branch, so he's the one that's supposed to execute the laws. You got the pardon, you got the command of the military, you got the control of the executive branch. It's the first time a case concerning criminal prosecution for alleged official acts of a president was brought before the Supreme Court. Official. He was sitting there giving a speech, and they were saying, well, was he candidate Trump at the time, or was he President Trump at the time? So July 1st, 2024, Trump v. U.S. ruled in a 6-3 decision that he did have absolute immunity for acts that he committed as president within his core constitutional purview, and at least presumptive immunity for official acts within the outer perimeter of his official responsibility. So even if the Constitution says, when it comes to the four things I mentioned, control the executive branch, execution of laws, command of the military, and the pardon. Now I want you to think about the command of the military. He's the commander-in-chief. He also runs the ATF. He runs the executive government, so the FBI, the CIA, the ATF. He runs the Army and the Navy and the Marines and the Air Force and the Coast Guard. And then he can even nationalize the National Guard in the states, especially red states, where the governor is okay with it or encourages it. And they've talked about this a couple times. They had mentioned it when it comes to illegal immigration, to nationalize the National Guard and then to use the National Guard to go after the immigrants. Now, Donald Trump even had suggested to shoot the protesters of the George Floyd protest. And he suggested it to his defense secretary, and he said it like obviously, and it was like really intimidating, because it was like, why don't you just shoot them? Just shoot the protesters. Can't you just shoot them in the legs? That's what Donald Trump said. He also inspired the January 6th, either A, insurrection, possible coup d'etat, but at the very least, a riot. He incited a riot. So Joe Biden right now could incite riots. Joe Biden right now could use the military. and if they could just make up an official reason, oh, we did it for A, B, and C. The dissent by Sonia Sotomayor was pretty incredible. The dissent of Sotomayor, because it was 6-3, so 3 did not vote for immunity. But she says that if Joe Biden was to order the Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, he's immune. If Joe Biden organizes a military coup in order to hold on to power, he is immune. If he takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon, he's immune, immune, immune. In every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. And so with fear for our democracy, Sonia Sotomayor, with fear for our democracy, I dissent. She cited Richard Nixon getting pardoned by the president who succeeded him, Gerald Ford. So if you get the president after you to pardon you, then you're good with everything. That had to do with the burglary, the Watergate burglary. They broke into the Democratic headquarters and they stole all their stuff. That's going to lead to Nixon's resignation. In the Nixon case, they said that he had to answer a subpoena because criminal prosecutions are that important. It is that important for a criminal prosecution. If he just says, hey, I have presidential immunity and that's it, just a general, hey, I get to do as the hell as I please. Alexander Hamilton said that former presidents were liable to prosecution and punishment in the ordinary course of law, but the people that had argued the case said that if the president wasn't indicted and convicted, then you can't go after him for criminal liability after the fact. Now, I will say that it's not absolute immunity, so I would like to think all those things I just said, that there would be some criminal repercussions. U.S. Grant got arrested for speeding. So let's get into some of the details of this case. It declined to rule on the scope of immunity for some of Trump's act alleged in the indictment. Instead of vacating the appellate decision, remanded the case to the district court for further proceedings. In Nixon v. Fitzgerald, 1982, the Supreme Court held that the president is immune from civil suit for money damages in regard to official acts. The court clarified in Clinton v. Jones, 1997, that the president is liable for civil damages for actions that were committed prior to assuming the presidency. There is another case with Nixon that they said that you can't sue him for civil liabilities. You can't get monetary damages for anything that he did while he was in office of his official duties. So in some respects, Jonathan Alderman, there was some constitutional expert that said it's that's the function of the executive. So I could see the argument for saying that when you're the president, for the 4 years that you're president, you get to do as the hell as you please. But I feel like that is a terrible precedent. You'd have to say at least some sort of official reason. Well, I did it because the Taliban. No, I was worried that the Taliban was in Tennessee, so I invaded all of Memphis. And since Donald Trump is pushing for people to shoot protesters, well, then that means our freedom of speech and our right to peacefully assemble and our right to petition, our First Amendment, is being threatened as well. So that's always, when it comes to the rights and it comes to the power. A lot of times when it comes to rights, people want to go straight to, well, you don't have absolute freedom when it comes to speech. You don't have absolute freedom when it comes to petitioning and peacefully assembling. And that's true. There's some legitimate excuses. I don't like the Chaplinsky decision. But they're saying with Chaplinsky, you have the right to speak your mind, but you can't say fighting words. You can't shout fire in a crowded movie theater. I feel like you can't threaten people. You can't just say you're going to go hurt people. So while you have freedom of speech, and most of the time I would agree that absolute anything is generally wrong. Absolute authority corrupts absolutely. So when it comes to the rights and the freedoms, okay, I'll give you that freedom of speech isn't absolute. But freedom of speech is the rule. So there's exceptions to the rule, but the rule is you get to speak. And the same thing would be for power. Nobody has a right to absolute power. He once said something, if he shot somebody on Fifth Avenue, his people would love him. They would still love him. Can he just go around murdering people? Can he just take an ice cream cone and shove it into somebody's face because he doesn't like their face? Can he rob a bank? Can he push an old person in a wheelchair down? If you have absolute immunity to anything that you do, maybe. And if that person says, well, I feared for my life. The person in the wheelchair, he just had that devilish look in his eyes. So I preemptively pushed him down to prevent him from attacking the president. People will make any old excuse. Sonia Massey was a perfect victim. Oh, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. Oh yeah, bang, bang, bang. And it sets a dangerous precedent, not only for future presidents, but it sets a dangerous precedent for the legislative branch, the Supreme Court, for the governors, for police officers, for anybody that's a part of government, a government official, to say that they got absolute immunity too. We got absolute immunity. Everybody has absolute immunity. It's like there's a plexiglass of white-collar criminals. We're allowed to say and do anything that we want to do. In the name of law and order. Nixon, 1974, Trump v. Vance, 2020, limit the president's privilege within the judicial process. The majority ruled that a president has absolute immunity from criminal liability for conduct within his exclusive sphere of constitutional authority. They further found that the president enjoys presumptive immunity for acts within the outer perimeter of his official responsibility. So if it's like, well, I had to go do the thing and I had to shove the ice cream into her face because she was trying to obstruct justice. I was trying to get some justice. She tried to block me from doing it. Ice cream in her face. That sounds like it's within the exclusive, that's within the outer perimeter of his official responsibility. He tried to, let's say with immigration, he tried to deport some immigrants. He goes there on the scene. He's not just relying on his border patrol. He does it himself. And even if he doesn't do it himself, does it give the border patrol and the Marines? We're supposed to be against the standing army. Our Constitution, America was founded on revolution. And there's a whole bunch of things that prevent tyranny. The three branches of government, the Constitution itself, the Bill of Rights are there to prevent tyranny. So when they say that he has absolute immunity, can he break the freedoms? Can he break the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and the rule of law? And I think in some aspects, but all the things that we have, the three branches of government, federalism, elections, this is what prevents tyranny. The rule of law, elections, federalism, three branches of government, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. And so if Biden right now was to order the military to start quartering in our homes, just straight up breaks the Third Amendment. That breaks all of the things. That breaks federalism, elections, the rule of law, three branches of government, Constitution, Bill of Rights. Well, maybe not elections. But it seems like if all six of those reasons are broken, then we have tyranny. We got a totalitarian fascist tyrant. We have an autocrat. When it comes to the Russian Revolution, they are against the autocracy. When it came to the American Revolution, we were against tyranny. Obedience, resistance to tyranny is obedience to God. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. There was some case with the presumption that Nixon didn't have immunity and could be prosecuted after leaving office, but then he got pardoned, so then he didn't have to worry about criminal prosecution. Sonia Sotomayor quoted U.S. founding father Alexander Hamilton, who wrote that former presidents would be liable to prosecution and punishment in the ordinary course of law. I believe the Third Amendment is self-executing. So if a soldier wants a quarter inside my house, then I have a right to just throw him out by however means I can. No, you can't live here. You can't use my toilets. You can't eat out of my fridge. You can't use my candles. This has historical precedent. This hasn't been a problem in America, and I think a lot of it has to do with just the legal history. It's clearly written in the Third Amendment. Soldiers can't quarter in your house. The king would have a standing army. The king would tell the army to occupy the colonies, occupy us. He didn't have enough money to pay the troops, and then that's just a thing of war, just to forage on the enemy. So since the American colonists were the enemy, then the king's troops was living with the enemy inside our houses, using our candles, eating our food, probably sleeping in our beds, sleeping with our wives, probably raping all of us. So that's constitutional, it's common sense, it's natural law, it's rational, it's logical. But with this, he may be immune. He may be immune from criminal prosecution. Supreme Court don't do anything, so really it's up to Congress. It's up to Congress to impeach him, and then it's up to Congress to convict. And if the Congress doesn't impeach and doesn't convict, it has to be impeached by the House of Representatives and then convicted by the Senate. Then it does seem like he's got nearly absolute immunity. Absolute immunity with his constitutional duties, his official duties. But they did say that he doesn't have immunity with his unofficial duties. So he may come up with a reason. Why did you push that old man in a wheelchair? Oh, I did it for national security. Oh, I did it for diplomatic reasons. That's what they said with Nixon. He couldn't claim executive privilege when it came to the tapes of the Watergate, but he could do it with military secrets, national security secrets, or diplomacy. So they gave the president 3 reasons why he could say that he doesn't have to turn over the evidence that he has. But the 1974 Nixon case says that it is so important for criminal prosecutions to carry on, and we need to establish facts, and if you have evidence that helps to establish a fact, well then we need that evidence. And to think that the Navy SEAL Team 6, he loves Putin. Putin kills his political opponents all the time. He got in power by terrorism, going after, what was that, Caucasia spot. He killed like tens of thousands of people in 1999. And he's held on to power by killing his political opponents. And like I said before, he did seriously push the Department of Defense Secretary, so the war czar. He pushed the war czar to shoot protesters, peacefully protesting. He also encouraged the riot to go into the Capitol, possible insurrection, possible coup d'etat. So if Biden wanted to hold on to power and he didn't relinquish it, he could order the military, and it would be up to the military to say, no, we're not going to do it. But if we're dependent on the soldier, the layman, the private, to say no to a presidential order, I think we're in a world of shit. Because they're not supposed to obey any unlawful order, but if the president does it, he's the commander-in-chief. They may think it's a lawful order. When it came to Nazi Germany, by giving the order, that gave them permission. And if people want to do evil anyways, hey, why don't you go over there and do some evil? It's official business. Here, no, we got this information and that information. It reminds me of The Sopranos when he told Christopher he said, that guy in there killed your father. And so then he goes in there and he pops him. And the guy said, whoever told you that is lying to you. So I see the balance of things here. You don't have absolute immunity for all things. The rule could be he's got a right to pardon people, and he's got the power to pardon, and he's got the power to enforce the military. But he doesn't have the power to enforce the military to just open fire on Americans. What they're doing in Gaza, just bombing the shit out of everybody, killing women, children, old people, anybody and everybody, civilians. That's terrorism. And technically, we have a war on terrorism right now. And I've gone back and forth. I don't like how they defined it, but terrorism is an awful tactic. Because even if you're, Che Guevara, and you're fighting, he says you need the people in order to win. So terrorism, if you're trying to be a George Washington, say, George Washington has a revolution in America, but if he just started killing Americans, wantonly, deliberately, mass slaughtering Americans, that eventually Americans would turn against his terrorism. You're not fighting for us, you're shooting us. So terrorism, attacking civilians, a lot of times they would have the king would conquer a new territory, and they would just make the people of that territory liege or citizens or subjects of the new realm. They would have to conquer the military people, and if they didn't surrender, then they might have to shoot them, and then sometimes they would just think about shooting them all. That's what had happened in Vietnam with America. That also happened in Leclerc in Haiti with the Haitian Revolution. France tried to reconquer Haiti and then re-enslave them. And then at the end, when Leclerc was losing and dying of yellow fever, he said, well, shit, maybe we should just kill all the Haitians and then bring new Africans in from Africa and then create them and make them slaves. So did Leclerc have the right to say no to Napoleon? Yeah, of course he does. You got a natural right, you got your own conscience, natural law, common sense, rational, logical. But he's got his orders, and if you get your orders, you get your marching orders, then you'll just do all sorts of atrocities. So they wrote a blueprint. Like I said, they said unofficial act. So if you push that person on a wheelchair over and you shove ice cream in some random person's face, you go up and you're smacking people, and Gilgamesh would rape people. The man and wife tried to get married, but Gilgamesh would take his kingly tax and would have sex with the wife before the man got to have sex with her. So Gilgamesh is raping everybody. You got the assaulters, you got the stealers, murderers. These are the worst crimes. Torturing, maiming, enslaving. And this asshole went to the damn island. Epstein Island. Could that be a part of diplomacy? Could that be a part of military something, national security something? They haven't even told us about JFK. So apparently, the assassination of JFK, that had immunity. If you can't catch the person, aren't they immune? The framers designed the presidency to provide for a vigorous and energetic executive. This is the Federalist No. 70. Alexander Hamilton. They vested the president with supervisory and policy responsibilities of utmost discretion and sensitivity. Nixon v. Fitzgerald. Appreciating the unique risk that arises when the president's energies are diverted by proceedings that might render him unduly cautious in the discharge of his official duties, the court has recognized presidential immunities and privileges rooted in the constitutional tradition of the separation of powers and supported by our own history. In Fitzgerald, for instance, the court concluded that a former president is entitled to absolute immunity from damages, liability for acts within the outer perimeter of his official responsibility. So from January 2017 to January 2021, Donald Jennifer Trump served as the President of the United States. On August 1st, 2023, a federal grand jury indicted him on 4 counts for conduct that occurred during his presidency following the November 2020 election. The indictment alleged that after losing that election, Trump conspired to overturn it by spreading knowingly false claims of election fraud to obstruct the collecting, counting, and certifying of the election results. In Georgia, he literally said, "Can you find me 1,000 votes?" He's lying. He even admitted that he lost by a whisker. Now he's walking that back. Oh, he never said those things. According to the indictment, Trump advanced his goal through 5 primary means. First, he and the co-conspirators used knowingly false claims of election fraud to get state legislators and election officials to change electoral votes for Trump's opponent, Joe Biden, to electoral votes for Trump. Second, Trump and his co-conspirators organized fraudulent slates of electors in 7 targeted states and caused these fraudulent electors to transmit their false certificates to the vice president and other government officials to be counted at the certification proceeding on January 6th. Third, Trump and his co-conspirators attempted to use the Justice Department to conduct sham election crime investigations and to send a letter to the targeted states that falsely claimed that the Justice Department had identified significant concerns that may have impacted the election outcome. Fourth, Trump and his co-conspirators attempted to persuade the vice president to use his ceremonial role at the January 6th certification proceeding to fraudulently alter the election results. And when that failed on the morning of January 6th, they repeated knowingly false claims of election fraud to gather supporters, falsely told them that the vice president had the authority to and might alter the election results, and directed them to the Capitol to obstruct the certification proceeding. Fifth, when a large and angry crowd violently attacked the Capitol and halted the proceeding, Trump and his co-conspirators exploited the disruption by redoubling their efforts to levy false claims of election fraud and convince members of Congress to further delay the certification. Based on this alleged conduct, let's say there was a dispute with the election. We would need an interim president. And the way that the Constitution reads is that the Speaker of the House, there is somebody that takes over. Because you would have let's say we have a dispute. We don't know who the president is. Well, there's a House contingent election. That means an election would go to the House of Representatives, and then the House of Representatives themselves would have an election. During that time, somebody is the president. I want to say the Speaker of the House, maybe the Vice President. The Vice President is the president. So Kamala would be the president while they had the vote. It depends on how long it took the House of Representatives to take the vote. And then you'd like to think that would be binding, but then people might say that there's problems with that. That should be totally videotaped. You got 535 members of Congress, of the House of Reps. That should just be obvious and on the record, and it should be videotaped so everybody knows for sure who voted what, and then we can count them, and the person who gets the majority is the president. So even if there is an election dispute, the way our Constitution reads is that it goes to the House of Representatives, and they have a contingent election. That's happened several times. During the corrupt bargain, Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson is going to get cheated out of the presidential election. He got the majority, I want to say, of both the Electoral College and the popular vote. But you needed I'm not for sure. He got the plurality. He didn't get a majority. That's what it was. And so then his election went to the contingent House election. And then we had that contingent House election. Try to figure it out. So based on the alleged conduct, the indictment charges Donald Trump with the conspiracy to defraud the U.S. in violation of 18 U.S.C. 371, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding in violation of Section 1512K, 3, obstruction of an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding in violation of Section 1512C2, Section 2 and 4, conspiracy against rights in violation of Section 241. Trump moved to dismiss the indictment based on presidential immunity. We conclude that under our constitutional structure of separated powers, the nature of the presidential power requires that a former president have some immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts during his tenure in office, at least with respect to the president's exercise of his core constitutional powers. This immunity must be absolute. As for his remaining official actions, he is entitled to immunity. At the current stage of proceedings in this case, however, we do not need and do not decide whether that immunity must be absolute or instead whether a presumptive immunity is sufficient. They send it back to the lower court. So we'll talk more about this in a second. More Trump v. U.S. Trump v. U.S. Trump first. 2024. Trump v. U.S.